This video is brought to you by Nvidia GeForce RTX 40 series GPUs, delivering industry-leading performance and unmatched visuals in games like Alan Wake 2, Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and yes, even S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Stick around to the end of the video to learn more about how Nvidia's cutting-edge hardware will transform the way you play. When reviewing a video game, context always matters, but I think it especially matters in the case of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. GSC Game World is a Ukrainian studio that had been through literal hell while making this game. During S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2's development, Russia invaded Ukraine, forcing some of the studio to relocate to the Czech Republic, but some of them still remain in Kyiv. Imagine getting anything done while your homeland was being invaded, let alone making an ambitious AAA open-world RPG. That to me is astonishing, and I've definitely kept that in mind while playing this game and writing this review, and I think it's good for all of us to keep that in mind while we consider the current state of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Because the reality is, the game is not finished. It's just not. And I'm going to detail that for you here in this review. It's why I'm not recommending the game, but do note the title of this video. Right now, I cannot recommend S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. But one day, I fully expect that I'll be able to, and I really do look forward to that day. Right now though, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is a cacophony of poor performance, game-breaking bugs, and underbaked systems that utterly ruin what I expect will one day be a very compelling experience. I'm about 25 hours into what the developers say is a 40-hour playthrough, and I honestly just can't play any more of it because it's too broken, and the entire time I'm just frustrated because I'm like, if this just worked, it would be sick, but it doesn't work, and that frustration just built and built to the point where I had to say, okay, that's enough. Mark my words, I want to return to this one day, because there is absolutely something here. It's very lean, it's simple, it's Spartan, almost shaved back to the bone at times, but there's a thing about being a dude with a gun wandering around a big wasteland where everything wants to kill you. Fallout is built on that shit. The wasteland wanderer fantasy is very alluring, and there are times, multiple times in fact, when S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 absolutely nails it. When the storm front rolls in, when the anomalies in the zone are breathing down your neck, when you chance upon a rival group of stalkers aiming to shake you down, when you really scour a location and find a new weapon or armor upgrade that just feels like a total game changer. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 can deliver these moments, and while there's a lot of dead space and boredom between these moments, those moments will be enough to carry this experience for the type of player who really loves this fantasy. But even when it's firing on all cylinders, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is not going to be for everyone. It is a very grueling, laborious, deliberately frustrating experience that is designed to test your endurance. It is very often not fun, because it's not meant to be. It's meant to immerse you in that arduous, dangerous, high-stakes stalker life, which is just as much about trudging 3 kilometers through the boring, empty darkness as it is fighting mutants and looting anomalous artifacts. I'll put it this way, imagine Fallout without the training wheels. Imagine all of its AAA convenience and progression and hand-holding sanded back so that all that's left is you and the wasteland and the lessons you learn along the way. If that kind of idea appeals to you, then I think you're going to like S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, but I strongly recommend against playing it now because it's just not finished. And right now will be the worst possible way to experience what I expect will one day be a pretty great video game.
The zone reveals a whole new world.
Let's start with performance and bugs, since that's going to be the deal breaker for a lot of people. So first of all, I cannot boot this game on one of my PCs. Whenever I try to do so, it simply crashes every time I try to compile shaders. I've heard from some reviewers that they've had the same problem, but they were able to troubleshoot it somehow. I wasn't able to do that, and so yeah, I still can't boot it on that other PC. Thankfully, I have more than one PC, and I was able to get it working on an RTX 4090 i9 13900K, 64GB of RAM. So I booted this up at 4K max settings, DLSS and FSR off. I just wanted to see how it natively rendered, and it was horrendous. Right from the jump, it's like 40 FPS, but like a really bad 40 FPS that just looks incredibly laggy and inconsistent. Pushing through with this for a little more, I was able to sit at around 40 to 50 FPS, but yeah, it was not what I would consider playable. I then turned down some of the settings and I enabled DLSS, setting it to performance, and at that point I was able to get around 60 FPS, but it really fluctuated a lot. Like in internal spaces, it can sometimes just totally tank and drop down to like 50 FPS, but outside when you're rolling around through the wilderness, it can go as high as like 80. It's way worse in towns though. When you arrive at the various settlements throughout the game, the FPS can crater to like 30 to 40. It's honestly crazy. But it's also not the whole story though, because these FPS numbers are kind of a lie. Like, yeah, you can often sit around 60 FPS, but the consistency of those frames is abysmal. And so the game feels terrible to play. Like, it says 60 FPS, but it kind of feels like 40 FPS. And when it says 30 FPS, it really means like 20, you know? DLSS 3 frame generation is available here, and it definitely does improve baseline frame rate, significantly so in fact. You do get more consistency, absolutely, but it doesn't solve the issue of that sluggish feeling. Even when Nvidia Reflex is enabled, the fact is performance is just terrible, and keep in mind that I'm playing on literally the best consumer level PC hardware that money can buy, and I'm running DLSS at performance. I really shudder to imagine how this will run on lower end machines, and my advice to you is that if you are picking this up on PC, be sure to make use of Steam's refund policy if you can't get the game running well enough for you. It's a shame that it runs so badly, because at times S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is a pretty incredible looking video game, combining environment design, lighting, weather effects, and the mysterious anomalies peppered throughout the zone. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 can have an almost arresting beauty that will stop you in your tracks. But just as often, the game's beauty is utterly poleaxed by various visual glitches. I mean, this is what it regularly looks like when you're just walking through the wilderness. Do you see how much popping is going on? How the textures seem to warp before your very eyes based on your distance to them? This happens all the time. The game's lighting is unfortunately really busted. It's trying to do a lot, but it rarely gets it right. Moving from internal to external spaces is a good example. Here's what often happens when you do that. Reflections are equally busted. Here, a car parked inside is reflecting the light outside, even though that's not possible in this context. And here, you can see how much difficulty the engine has trying to reflect the sunlight on the glass in this outdoor setting. Internal light sources seem really off, and I can't tell when this is intentional or not. Like here, it's clearly unintentional. Here, there's plenty of sunlight filtering into the room through the windows, and there's a light right here that's turned on, like facing the guy. I've seen this area properly lit, and I've seen it when it looks like this, and here it's clearly busted.
Oh, my favorite customer.
Other times, the use of darkness feels like it might be intentional, but it's so oppressive that I just can't imagine that this is what GSC were aiming for. Like here, I'm in a firefight with these dudes inside a warehouse, and I'm outside, and I just can't see shit. This happens all the time, by the way. I'm basically blind firing into the dark because there is no light source inside. And yeah, it's like realistic, I guess, but it's also really shitty to play. By the way, you've no doubt noticed a sort of static effect on a bunch of footage while I've been talking. We'll get to that later, but yes, this is an intended visual effect that occurs whenever you have radiation poisoning. No, you cannot turn it off in the UI menu, and yes, it made me want to claw my eyes out. More on that later though. Back to the bugs. In addition to those engine-based visual glitches are a number of asset-based glitches, like NPCs and objects just floating in midair. You will often see very weird, fucked up head geometry like this. UI elements will often flicker in and out for no apparent reason. You will encounter T-posing corpses from time to time, like these bad boys. NPCs will regularly stand on top of each other during cutscenes like this.
Sometimes good people make bad choices.
And then there's whatever's going on here.
I mean, take a look at the view. Stay away from the edge.
So these are just some of the visual bugs I encountered during my playthrough, but don't worry, audio is way worse. There is a massive audio glitch that causes weapon sounds to just not work all the time. It was probably the single most disruptive bug I encountered during my playthrough because it really takes the vibe out of a gunfight when your gun isn't making any sound.
I'm hiding.
Positional audio is totally foobar, like absolutely balked, and this has a profound impact on combat since you need to hear where enemies are, and you simply cannot trust any of the positional audio. It totally misfires all the time, telling you that enemies are breathing down your neck when they're nowhere near you, or that they're in front of you when they're not. It's a total mess.
Target lost. At ease, man.
Audio barks are also totally off. Enemies will regularly shout shit that just isn't right. Like here when I'm just murdering fools in plain sight, and yet the guards are like, nothing to see here.
Nobody here. Put down your gats.
So that's visuals and audio, but there are plenty of quest-affecting bugs too. One very common one is that you'll complete an objective, but it won't update in the UI, so you don't think you have completed the objective, and then you spend like an extra 20 minutes trying to solve a problem that you've already solved. That was very annoying. There was one bug that cost me hours, like literal hours. You're really reliant on your stash in this game because your carry limit is so ridiculously low that you need to keep dumping excess ammo and gear into your stash. And you need this stuff, by the way, because resources are scarce, so you can't just toss it away. Anyway, I get to the second town and I'm looking for my stash, and there's no stash. There's a map marker for where the stash should be, but I can't get to that map marker. So I'm really confused, and I'm thinking, well, maybe it's kind of like in a hidden area that opens up to me later once I've spoken to some NPC in town or whatever. I don't know. So I spend the next few hours of this game over encumbered, walking significantly more slowly than I otherwise would because I had all this valuable shit with me and I had nowhere to dump it. I kept thinking that the game must give me a stash location sometime soon. Eventually, by pure coincidence, I happened to spot my stash in that same town. Only it wasn't next to my bed, where it is in like every other location. It was just in the like weapon vendor's shop for some reason, and the map marker that said where it should be was wrong. It was wrong, okay? And so all this time I could have been dumping my gear into this stash had this fucking map marker been in the right location, but it wasn't. So I spent hours just cursing this encumbrance system, which definitely has its problems, by the way, don't get me wrong, but it's made even worse by this bug map marker. And that's an example of just one bug doing critical damage, but there were also instances where all the bugs would hit at once, and it just becomes an absolute clown show. Like, take a look at this clip.
I'm moving to cover, brothers. Keep the enemy pinned.
The son of the monolith is no more.
I can sense you, enemy of the monolith.
Did you catch all that? We got some positional audio misfire, just completely wrong. You got my weapon sounds not working, and you got whatever the fuck is going on with this guy. Moments after this, by the way, is another bug where enemies can see you through walls. We'll talk more about that one later when we cover stealth, but that's also totally busted. Bottom line, man, it's a total mess. It really is. From performance to visual bugs to audio bugs to gameplay bugs and everything in between, it's just a mess. It's still playable though, absolutely, and I don't want to give you the impression that every moment of your playthrough will be this, but enough moments of my playthrough were this, such that I eventually reached the point where I had to tap out. I am very, very sympathetic to the challenges this studio faced when making this video game, and I'm personally okay to keep waiting for it to get into a more polished technical state, but do I think that people should slap down their time or money for this right now? No, I absolutely do not when it's in this state.
I need all of us to understand the urgency of the situation, given the extreme importance of our mission.
Where's my fucking scanner?
PMs tend to misfire a lot.
Sector 9, visual detection of the vault. I say again, Sector 9, visual detection of the vault.
So let's take a moment to explain what sort of game Stalker 2 actually is. If you haven't played the previous Stalker games before, the easiest touch point is Fallout 3 and 4. You are a dude in a big wasteland, and I mean really big, it's like 60 square kilometers apparently, and you can feel every meter of that as you're trudging through it. There is a main questline that'll send you to various locations where more scripted scenarios play out featuring specific enemies and NPCs, but a lot of the game is just wandering around, bumping into bandits who want to steal your stuff, fighting off swarms of annoying mutant rats, scrounging for weapons, gear, and consumables to keep you alive for one more day. Like I said in the intro, it's Fallout without any of its AAA trimming, since the experience is meant to be much more arduous and unforgiving. There is a storyline here, and while I have not seen it through to its conclusion, the 25 hours I have experienced have been honestly awful. It's no exaggeration to say that for most of my playthrough, I had no idea what was going on other than I was a dude who was trying to recover something that was stolen from me, and that was about it. Eventually, like really eventually, a plot starts to coalesce around something that's kind of interesting, and I won't spoil it, but if you've read Roadside Picnic, which is the novel that the Stalker series is based on, then I think it's a plot that will pique your interest. But it was honestly like 15 or so hours in before any of that started to surface, and before that it just felt so confused and meandering and lost. That's a general point I'd make actually. Stalker 2 makes a horrendously bad first impression. The intro sequence you go through lasts for about 45 minutes, and it feels like it's tailor-made to get people to quit this game. It's so dark that you can barely see anything, core game systems are not explained to you, and you will die for not having understood them, basic objectives are unclear and super frustrating to complete, you'll get over-encumbered like immediately and there's no way to avoid that, the list goes on. I spoke to a few reviewers and they all had different takes on the game, but one thing that everyone could agree on is that that intro sucked. So if you're going to saddle up for this, then be aware of that and know that it does get better after the title card. But don't look to that main story for redemption, because you will find none. It is a story starring basically no characters, since your transient existence means you only see characters once or twice tops. The character you play as says little and has basically no personality. The whole thing just seems to be a wild goose chase for the first 15 or so hours until eventually a semblance of plot comes into focus. But even then, it's still pretty weak. So should you play Stalker 2 for the story? Hell no, man, absolutely not. So why should you play Stalker 2 then? Well, you're kind of playing it for everything else, the exploration, side content, and core gameplay that lets you live out this Stalker fantasy and write your own story. So as a primer for all of this, I really do recommend reading Roadside Picnic. It's an incredible book that tells the story of treasure hunters known as stalkers who dare to raid an exclusion zone filled with dangerous anomalies. Aliens had visited the zone sometime before, and the things they left behind defy the laws of classical physics as we know them, and so something as simple as like a grease spill or a cobweb could be lethal in ways we could never even imagine, and the various artifacts that the aliens left behind are highly prized for their unique, sometimes limitless power. The Stalker universe remixes this idea slightly, connecting it loosely to the Chernobyl disaster, but keeping the existence of dangerous, unknowable, physics-defying anomalies. This is where Stalker 2 is strongest. The exclusion zone is a vast expanse of mysteries, most of them dangerous in ways that you need to learn by dying to them. That was probably the thing I enjoyed most about Stalker 2. There are so many of these anomalies peppered throughout the landscape, and the first time you meet them, you just die to them because you don't know what they are or what they do. But over time, you learn how to survive each of them, and that's exactly the sort of journey that real stalkers went on in Roadside Picnic, or that we ourselves go through in games like Pacific Drive or Outer Wilds. Like many of these sorts of stories, the real horrors of the zone are the humans trying to scratch out a life there, and this is another big part of the gameplay loop. As you explore, you'll chance upon both friendly and hostile stalkers, bandits, armed factions trying to assert territorial claims, as well as just aimless wanderers, many of whom aren't looking for any trouble but still find themselves in it nonetheless. Like this guy, for example. His brother was killed by an anomaly, and he's asking me to help fetch his corpse, only he asks that I don't pilfer his pockets when I do so. When I ignore his pleas and pilfer them nonetheless, he's none too pleased about it.
What about my payment?
You looted my bro's body. You ain't getting a single coupon from me.
Tense showdowns with bandits and stalkers are the most common occurrence though, and most of these involve some sort of decision making. You might choose to play along and help them out, you might choose to tell them to go fuck themselves, you might say you're gonna play along and then you double cross them. That's all up to you, and to the game's credit, there is usually enough flexibility in the dialogue and gameplay systems for those decisions to feel real. But there are also plenty of times when these sorts of scripted encounters just don't quite work. Like this one, for example. I rock up and I see a dude on the ground wounded, and I'm like, alright, well, I'll help him out because, you know, why not? I'll just do that. So here's what happens.
Let's get these pieces of shit.
Cover me.
So there's no way I could have known that those guys would attack me if I helped him out, but anyway, I learned the hard way. So I die and I reload my save, and then I chat with these guys, and they're like, this dude hid something in these pigsties. Do you want to go find it? And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I go in there and I couldn't see it, so I start heading over to the other pigsty, which is just across the way, and then this happens.
The chump's running away! Get him, boys!
And it's like, how was I supposed to know that that would happen? But there's quite a bit of that goes on in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, where it's clear that GSC have scripted encounters to go a certain way, and if you don't play along with that script exactly as they planned it, then the scenario breaks, which really pulls you out of the emergent storytelling that you're trying to write for yourself. More tangibly, there are plenty of side quests to do. Most of them involve just going to a place to kill some dudes or retrieve a thing. They do feel like open world busy work type quests, but because the open world can often be quite surprising with what it has to offer, I didn't too much mind when some quest giver sent me out to go murder some wild dogs or whatever. Fundamentally, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is less about the story that GSC wants to tell and more about the story that you want to tell yourself, through your footfalls, through your decisions, through your discoveries. So often the game will disappoint you owing to some bug or some poorly scripted event, but when it delivers, it really does deliver. Right now, the scales tip far more toward disappointment than delivery, but as the screws get tightened on this, that balance will shift, and the process of exploring the zone and peeling back its mysteries will be so satisfying and so rewarding that it'll make up for whatever shortcomings exist in the writing and the mission design. When it comes to the core gameplay loop of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2, there are really three elements. There's survival, there's combat, and there's stealth. All of them are rife with problems, and the stealth is just straight up broken. Survival first though. On the whole, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 survival systems are very casual, very light touch, and honestly, I think they're fairly underbaked. You get hungry, but you're so inundated with food drops that so long as you just keep eating everything you find as you find it, you never need to think about hunger. There's no thirst system. Water just replenishes stamina, which can be helpful in a pinch, but it can't alleviate the real stamina threat, which is encumbrance. There's radiation exposure, which you can cure by swigging vodka, and you'll never struggle to find that either. You can bleed, but that's quickly fixed by bandages, which are again so numerous that bleeding is rarely anything more than a temporary bother. And health packs are so numerous and so efficacious that most gunfights are just about, stabbing yourself in the arm over and over again until there's no enemies left. I won't go into all that stuff into any more detail except to say that right now it feels almost placeholder. It gestures towards depth without actually delivering any, and a rebalancing of those systems and the item economy around them will no doubt occur at some point in the future. The encumbrance system though. This fucking encumbrance system. I really do believe that if you removed encumbrance from like 95% of video games that utilize it, you'd instantly arrive at a better video game. And never has that been more true than in the case of S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Oh my god, I cannot explain to you how utterly crippling this encumbrance system is here. The weight limit you have is so absurdly low that even with just, 2 equipped weapons, 1 in your bag, some ammo, and some basic provisions, you are already well on your way to being encumbered, at which point you move so slowly and your stamina drains more quickly, you can't jump as often because you just wait until your fucking stamina to refill. It's so annoying! And then you head out into the field and you collect some other ammo for some other gun that you might not be using at that exact moment, maybe a new piece of armor, God forbid a 4th weapon, and you're immediately over encumbered. And if you then want to get that stuff back to base so you can, stash it or whatever, there's no fast travel, you just have to walk very, very slowly back to base. At one point, one of the critical missions gives you an item that weighs 12 kilograms, which even if you pack light, immediately puts you over the weight cap. And then it asks you to walk like 4 kilometers through a swamp while encumbered. Jesus Christ, man, like, if I was to play this game at launch, the very first thing I would do, is I would download a mod that disables or at least greatly relaxes the weight limit in this game, because it absolutely destroyed my enjoyment, and it made this game so much more painful and more boring than it should have been. Okay, encumbrance rant done. What about combat? Well, it's a mixed bag. In terms of its fundamentals, I really like how weapons feel. There's a big focus on tactility and recoil, and it's hard to hit your mark, but in a good way. It really does ask you to line up your shots, and that process does become easier as you invest in quality mods for your guns, as well as keeping them properly maintained. There's quite a range of weapons too, and though I didn't get to try nearly as many of them as I would have liked due to the encumbrance limit, the ones I did try all felt great, and I think people who enjoy raw gunplay will enjoy shooting guns in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. I will say that on the whole, combat against human enemies is pretty good. The AI is definitely very inconsistent, sometimes surprisingly clever and responsive, other times totally brain dead, but more often than not, firefights feel really tense and clutch, and I enjoyed them. It's when we start getting to the mutant enemies that things really fall apart. There's a surprising lack of mutant enemy variety in the game, and what's here all feels like it's one or two enemy types that have been reskinned. Like there are these giant mutant meatball things that kind of just run at you. And then there are also mutant boars that also just run at you. There are skittery little dogs that run at you and are super annoying to shoot, and there are also skittery little rats that run at you and are even more annoying to shoot. The biggest pain in the ass though are these guys. They look like Doom imps, but they can knock you down and turn invisible, and they're really cool the first time you fight them, but the 50 times after that, they're just annoying as hell, especially when you're forced to fight them in enclosed spaces when all you can do is stand there healing through their chip damage while you slowly wear them down. The general theme for all of these enemies is they run right up to your face and hit you, and that's all they got. That means you almost always need to have a shotgun with you because it's the most effective weapon against that type of attack. And it's just kind of uninteresting given the sorts of enemies you could have in a zone transformed by the impacts of a nuclear incident. That brings us to stealth, which is, as I have mentioned many times already, totally broken. Like every part of it is broken. So vision cones are actually the main problem. Here's me in a forest, headlamp off, pitch black darkness, and these guys can somehow see me making my approach. And you might say, well, isn't that realistic? And the answer is no. Go look into some greenery at night and see how far you can see. But setting that aside, vision cones are just broken. Like here I'm apparently being spotted by someone, but where the fuck are they? The truth is, and I learned to accept this eventually, enemies can just straight up see you through walls. Like this moment here where I just like crack a door open, but it immediately alerts all guards in the area.
Come and get me! Ha!
Even stealth takedowns don't work properly. Like here I am up on a roof on my own doing a silent takedown of a dude, and when I execute it, I immediately aggro nearby guards for some reason.
Find that rat!
And here, the takedown animation doesn't work at all, so I end up just slashing some dude in the back repeatedly, again, alerting all nearby guards. The name S.T.A.L.K.E.R implies that you might be doing some stalking from time to time, and right now, the currently implemented stealth model makes stalking impossible. They may as well rename it to like Shooter or something, because Lord knows that'd be a much more accurate title. Anyway, look, the survival stuff is placeholder, but I think that when it gets a balance pass or some really good mods, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 could provide a fairly compelling survival experience that complements its exploration. The combat against humans is pretty good for the most part, but the mutant enemies could do with some work, and the stealth stuff is... I'm not going to say it for the 10th time, you know exactly what I think. Much like the rest of the game, S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2's core gameplay elements are a mix of impressive, buggy, and unfinished, and none of them are so good that it's worth putting up with their shortcomings now, rather than waiting to experience them at some point in the future, where they will hopefully be actually finished. That's kind of the main point of this whole video. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is out now, and it will be out forever, and the very worst state it will ever be in is right now. GSC has already announced ambitious plans for the future, 2 DLC expansions for the game, one of which will deliver a multiplayer mode, which we assume will be co-op, and that's pretty cool, because honestly, rolling around the zone with a buddy would be pretty sick. But separate from that new content will be a raft of technical improvements, bug fixes, and quality of life changes that will hopefully get this thing to the point where it's really humming. To be clear though, I suspect that the road ahead for this game is not a short one. Like, I don't think you fix all of these issues up in 3 months. With a smaller team working on it post-launch, this feels like a 12 to 18 month journey for real. I'd love to be proven wrong, but the scale of issues that I alone encountered during my playthrough, there's simply no way you fix all of that up quickly. I think it'll be a long process. but I do think it will ultimately be a really worthwhile process. The original S.T.A.L.K.E.R games are still held in really high regard today, and they too were really buggy and broken at launch. But they nailed a fantasy and a setting and a vibe that is rare in video games, despite how appealing it is. S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is at times nailing that same fantasy and setting and vibe, like it just does. I don't want to play any more of this game in its current state, but I can't wait to play this game when it's done, because even though the story is disappointing and there are some design elements I don't love, there's an undeniable appeal to what GSC has built here. The zone calls to us, and I don't think we should answer that call just yet, but when the time comes, I think S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 will firmly take its place alongside its predecessors as a compelling, worthwhile survival RPG experience, one that players will come back to for many years to come. I look forward to that day, but right now, I cannot recommend S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Okay, so that's S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. A real shame I couldn't recommend it, but I am hopeful that in a few years' time this will be one worth coming back to. However, I know that plenty of you are keen to play on day one, fair enough. So if you're going to do that, I strongly recommend you do so on a GPU from this video sponsor, Nvidia. So obviously, Nvidia GPUs are the best on the market. In terms of the raw processing power of their hardware, nothing comes close to what an Nvidia 40 series GPU is capable of. And since S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2 is a very, very demanding game, you're going to need all the GPU grunt you can get your hands on. But it doesn't stop there, because Nvidia GPUs are more than just their throughput. They're also about the proprietary Nvidia technology that can push that hardware to new heights. Nvidia DLSS 3 is one example. DLSS 3 frame generation uses AI to interlace additional frames in between those which are being natively rendered by your hardware. This can often double and sometimes triple your frame rates in games, and that's something that I personally have experienced in a huge number of games that I've tested. We spoke about this during the review, but DLSS 3 does substantially increase baseline frame rates, allowing you to clear over 100 FPS while playing at max settings, 4K resolution. That's the sort of performance that is frankly impossible without the support of DLSS 3. It's a feature supported across a huge range of titles too. Take Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, which just launched this past week. That is a game that supports DLSS 3 with frame generation, so you're getting the smoothest possible experience, and it also supports Nvidia Reflex for more snappy and responsive gameplay. Same goes for Red Dead Redemption, which also launched earlier this month on PC. Yeah, it's a 14-year-old game, but the technology that powers it on PC is anything but old, as it also supports both DLSS 3 and Nvidia Reflex, giving you the headroom to enable 4K resolution and ultra-wide gameplay depending on your setup. As of just recently, over 600 games are now enhanced by Nvidia's RTX technology, and more titles are added every single month. PC gaming is at its absolute best with AI-powered Nvidia DLSS, so if you'd like to learn more about these games and this technology, then I've left a link to Nvidia's DLSS page below. Thanks Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.